The Unsweetened Truth, where we don't sugarcoat anything. This podcast is for the business owners, entrepreneurs, truth seekers, the rufflers of the feathers, the risk takers, and major decision makers with some amazing stories. Well, let's get sharing. Steve Pucci here with the Unsweetened Truth. We have a new topic today with a fellow colleague of mine, Steve Pucci. The topic is going to be forming, storming, norming, performing in team building, and also tools for successful problem solving. So both very important topics today. He's an expert in both. And Steve, just wanted to welcome you onto the show.
Hi, Kristen. Thank you for having me, and I love the format, so glad to do it. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. I think you're going to be a really great guest. So before we get into it, is there anything you want to tell our listeners about yourself, about your career, or anything like that?
Sure. Maybe a quick summary. So as you mentioned, I'm currently the director of supply chain. I mean, I've been working now for about 35 years. I mean, I'm becoming an old timer, right? You know, three companies in my career. And I would say Fortune 500 company, as well as large private company. You know, currently it's, we manufacture products across the world. We've got locations everywhere. And, throughout my career, I've been, individual performer versus a supervisor versus a manager, of course, now, director of supply chain, and in all functions. I started in engineering, moved into production, of course, quality, management, supply chain. So anyway, it should be interesting. And I think the couple topics that we're going to hit on today, I think people will find them useful. Hopefully they do, and love to get into it.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's start with the first one. And I want to make sure I'm saying them in the right order. It is forming, storming, norming, and performing. And you said that this has to do with team building. So go ahead and just kind of tell everybody what that's all about.
Yes. You wonder if people know when you talk about this, it's catchy, right? Mm-hmm. Storming, norming, performing. And people talk about, well, what is this? What can this possibly be?
Yeah.
It's all about team building. Now, when you think about it, even as a supervisor or a manager, you want the people that work in your department, you want them to work well. You want them to be successful. If you're a project leader, right, you're leading some major project, you want your team to perform well. Okay.
Yeah.
What's interesting, what you find over the years is that any area, I would say anything you get involved in, I don't care whether it's a project at work. I don't care if you have your kids joining a sports team, okay, getting thrown together on a new sports team. I would tell you from experience, you will go through these 4 stages. It is a given. You will go through it. You can't skip any. You think you might be able to, but this will happen. And the question becomes, as a good supervisor, as a good project leader, is to recognize that these things are going to happen. And how do you minimize the amount of time in the forming, storming phase? Because obviously you want to get into the norming and performing as quickly as possible. You want a high-performing team. You want a high-performing individual. How do you get through those initial stages so that you can have a successful project, a successful employee? And the more you recognize that this is going to happen, and how do you deal with those things when they happen to minimize the impact, the more successful your individuals and your team and your objective will be.
Okay.
In a nutshell, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. So when you talked about the 4 steps, it sounds like you said forming and storming. You want to get through those as soon as possible to get to norming and performing, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So how would you recommend doing that?
Yeah. Well, maybe to start with is how do you recognize when this is happening?
Okay.
Because think about this. So You have a new employee that joins your group, joins your team, or you put together as a company, right? You're working on a project. Think about you in the construction industry, right? You're working on a project and you bring together these different people. How do you get to a norming, performing stage to be successful in accomplishing the objectives? And knowing that the forming, storming is going to happen, what can you do? How do you recognize it so that it doesn't drag the whole thing down? It doesn't drag the individuals down. How do you recognize those things? And then be able to, as a project lead or a supervisor, be able to address those early, quickly, so that you solve it and move on. Okay, I'll give you a few examples of what this looks like. Okay, just kind of taking some notes here. All right. Think about, you're sitting in a team, a discussion, a meeting, and one individual sort of trying to steamroll another individual, right? You kind of say, you hear somebody throwing somebody else under the bus, right?
Yep, I've been in those meetings.
Stuff happens. It happens, okay? Picture, I describe it as well, too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Okay, everyone wants to be driving an initiative. They want to be the boss. They want to recognize, hey, they're doing a great job. Hey, I'm great. I got my ego involved. But at the end of the day, it's not a democracy, right? You've got a leader, a project lead that's driving an initiative. You've got a department supervisor, and there has to be an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and how each person plays into this. You can't have too many chiefs, right?
Yeah.
I would just say I've seen examples where literally two people get into an argument in the middle of a meeting, right?
You've been in a
get into an argument.
You've been in a meeting that people have gotten into an argument.
Absolutely. I mean, the names and the 4-letter words flying and everything else. I mean, it happens, okay? And you sort of look at this and think of the silos. You hear the term silos, people operating in silos.
Yep.
Well, that happens too as a team meeting, right? Some people don't like another, or they don't agree with what we're trying to achieve. And think of a new employee coming into a group that doesn't feel like they're a part of the group, and they're over here on the side, and picture somebody doesn't talk a lot, they're quiet, right? They don't want to participate much. Well, those are signs sometimes that you've got what I call the forming, storming phase going on, and you really want a team that's a highly effective team that's working together. But you've got times where people, they won't show up for a meeting, right? You call a weekly meeting or something that you're getting your department together, or your project team. People won't show up. Well, what's going on, right? Why didn't you show up? Well, they make excuses and things like this. Some of them are more blatant. Others are more sort of soft and indirect. But realize this is all part of the forming, storming phase, right? Mm-hmm. This stuff happens. It's real. It'll happen in any scenario where you throw people together, really spend any time talking about, well, why are we here? What's different people's roles? So let's get into a bit maybe on, so how do you go about, what are some of the things that you can do in that early stage, right? Yeah. You get through it as quickly as possible. So, I mean, does that make sense? Have you seen examples of these types of things, right? These are real examples of the storming phase.
Yeah, I think even just in my own jobs and even starting Cray, when I started, it was just me. And then I had to make a hire, and then I had to make another hire. And I remember, I think like right when you start working with someone, and this has been in any role, not even just at Cray, you're really excited in the beginning. You're really excited. You're like, oh my gosh, here's this shiny new person. I got to learn all about them. I'm going to, they're going to follow me around, and I'm going to train them. But that gets old pretty quick. And I think then you start, whatever that is.
You get through the niceties, right? The niceties in the beginning. Yes.
Yeah. All of that wears off. And not that you don't like them anymore, but just you, as you're saying, you get into the storming phase of, okay, now our team has been formed. Now I'm noticing that there's some things about them that are a little bit obnoxious, or and vice versa, they might find me obnoxious. And, we can figure out because we still have to work together. We still have to work together. So how can we get over those things and move into the next step that you're calling norming? So yes, I have worked,
Yes.
even on sports teams, you have a new
Yes.
person that's, maybe a new kid moves from a different school and comes to your school. And then you're used to being in the top 5 on a basketball team. And now, oh, wait, now
Yes.
you need to work this new person onto the team. So I'm with you. I'm definitely.
I mean, think about the parents in storming on a new sports team. Oh my goodness, right? The parents get involved in the storming phase, right? But think back again to work related. You don't find people disagree on what we're trying to achieve.
Mhm.
What is the objective that we're trying to achieve? People disagree. When they disagree and people start going off in their own direction, is that a high performing team? No, right? You got people doing different things and we're not sort of all aligned on it. All affects the ability for success. And I guess I just sort of come back to the bigger picture. When you work as long as some of us have been working, right, in different companies and things, you find at the end of the day, as you get older, it's all about the people. Mm-hmm. You are not going to be successful unless you have successful people, right? If you've got people that are high performing, I call them the A players, right? People that they're able to work effectively, able to drive these things. It's all about the individual people, right? And your job as you get into higher level positions and things is to make or help your people be successful.
Yep.
Right? This is the art of a manager, of a project leader. You want your team, your individuals to be successful. Recognize you're going through this forming and storming phase. It's going to happen. It is going to happen 99.9% of the time. I don't care what group you throw people together. So anyway, I guess let's then come back to, so how do you do this? As a project lead or a supervisor or the owner of a company, how do you work through these early stages in order to get to the norming performing? Because that's where we want to be. We want to have a highly performing group of people that work for us, that work in our company, right? This kind of stuff. It's, I guess you could say some of this is the art of good leadership, right? I mean, every person is not the same. There's good leaders, there's not so good leaders. So, a part of this is related to the individual itself, but there are tools, skills, capabilities that you can do. And think of it as in your world, contracts, the contracting phase, I call it the contracting phase. Now, what does that actually mean? This is in the forming part where, okay, well, either I'm leading a project or I'm a supervisor of a department. What are our key objectives? What are the key things, the priorities that we're going after? What is this problem that we're trying to solve? Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you think about this and you say, okay, as people are joining this team or people in your department, you want to get clarity on roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what? What do we expect each of these individuals to do, right? And what does success look like? How do we paint this vision of what the success criteria, what does success look like? As we see this problem that we're all getting thrown together to work on, a project or whatever, what does success look like? What is what we're trying to achieve, right? And I think the sooner people understand that in the beginning, I think the better off you are.
Okay.
The sooner you have the discussion about, because in many cases in large companies, you're getting people from different departments, right? Somebody from engineering, somebody from finance, somebody from sales, somebody from quality, and realize these people are working on all kinds of things. Everyone has their list of things that they have to do. And what you're trying to do is get a certain amount of their time, right? To focus on your project, on your initiative. Well, in the beginning, okay, let's get an understanding of how much time are you able to spend on this project, right? Is it just simply a few hours a week? These are all the part of the forming phase so that you can minimize the storming when all of a sudden, surprise, you thought this person was going to be spending 50% of their time on your project, and all of a sudden they're only spending 5. Yep. Well, what happened? I thought you were spending 50. No, I wasn't. I never said that. You get into these disagreements where if you just spend some time in the beginning defining, here's what we're doing, here's what the members are, here's what roles they play, the time they're spending. I think the more you can do that, and I'm not talking about spending weeks and weeks and weeks doing this. This could be done in an afternoon, right?
Yeah.
You can start addressing that forming stage to try to minimize the storming aspect by not doing those things, right?
So I heard clear expectations from what you were saying.
Yes.
Like having very clear expectations in the beginning, delegating, and also recognizing that no matter what, you are going to go through this. So don't try to ignore it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Think of it from the relationship aspect. Again, understanding who's working on a team, who these people are, and building that relationship just more, even on a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a personal level, but a relationship, right? Sessions with some of the groups where, tell us something, these are you're sitting in a team meeting, right? In the early stages. Let's, think about some of the things that maybe nobody knows about you. So we're going to go around the room and you're going to share with us, what are some of those things that nobody knows about you? What do you do? What do you do outside of work? This kind of stuff. It's building that rapport, that teamwork, the relationships, because you're going to be spending a lot of time together. And if people don't like each other, it's going to be a struggle, right?
Yeah.
Right?
That was actually an activity I did in a past job. I don't remember exactly the name of the activity, but there was a big group of words, and we had to like grab 10 words out of the big clump of words that were most important to us. And then we had to circle the top 4. If I'm remembering correctly, we had to circle the top 4. And you were supposed to do this with your team. And some of them were like family or respect, honesty, whatever. And I remember mine were, I want to say it was like honesty, respect, communication, something like that. And you learn that other people's things that are most important to them weren't even on your top 10. So it's like, how do you start, like if for example, say on somebody else's that their biggest thing is honesty, and honesty wasn't even on your top 10. Oh, well, this person is going to expect a lot of honesty from me, and maybe I need to evaluate how I communicate with them. But that was just a really good exercise. So if anybody knows what I'm talking about that's listening or wants to hear about the exercise, I'm sure I could find it, but it definitely was very rewarding because it really, as you're saying, dug deeper into people's personalities and helped you better understand who they are on a human level.
Yes. To bring this to, I kind of say the supply chain area, because, we spend a lot of time in purchasing and negotiating, right? Negotiating with people. You just sort of little team building exercises in the beginning to get to know people, right? We had one example where I simply, again, I'm dealing with a bunch of supply chain people. They have to understand and develop their negotiating skills, right? So this is a training session on negotiating skills, okay? And I literally simply took out and I gave $50 to each pair of 2 people. I split up the room into 2 people each, right? Here's $50, peel out $50, okay? Whoever has the most money at the end of this exercise wins. Go. And just let them go. And just funny what happens and how they just enjoy these kinds of things where, in a normal work environment, sometimes it gets a little stuffy, you're focused on work constantly and people don't get a chance to really get to know some of the people that they're working with, build that relationship and be able to work together as a team. Because realize in any company, you have to be able to work together as a team. You are going to be working, if you're going to be successful, you are going to be working with engineering, finance, quality, sales, the ability for people to work together, communicate together, and be able to address, that's it. That's the key.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So we've talked about forming, storming. So how do you, I guess a question that I have is once you're going through storming, what are the little, I'd almost picture it as like white flags. When you start seeing white flags being, waved around, that the norming phase is coming. Are there things that you could see that would be happening that like, okay, we're all right, guys, we're out of the thick of it. We're out of storming. And now I see that people are starting to turn into that norming phase. What would you see there?
Yeah, I think, people just I'll tell you, it does, it's obvious when you're sitting in a room, let's say you have a team meeting, right? And your group is getting together once a week, whatever it is. You'll notice very fast just the communication and the facial expressions and everything else of people interacting, okay? You'll know very fast if people are more open in sharing information, in helping each other, right? Somebody's good at this, somebody's good at finance, somebody's good at, a certain task, right? Other people are good at something else. You'll see how people start helping each other, not necessarily ridiculing them, right? Because you see this in the norming, in the storming phase, right? It's more a competition between people, right? Who's going to get the glory and everything else, as one example. But you really start to see how people are truly working together. And when you start looking at the aspects of whatever you're trying to solve, whatever project, whatever thing you're trying to do, people know what each other's role is, and it just flows, right? It just starts to flow. And you find too that your meetings become much shorter as well, because you're not spending a lot of time on dealing with having to explain this, explain that. People start gelling, they start working well together, and you know this, and your meetings become much more efficient and effective, right?
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay. So you start seeing those different things. Yeah, I was thinking about something as you were talking about warning signs, or maybe when you realized you fixed the problem. There was circumstance, like I typically tend to be a very passionate person. I'm very loud, not loud in meetings, but you hear I like to share my point of view. I have no problem sharing things about myself. And I remember seeing a quote one time when I was going through kind of an issue at work. And I remember I got very quiet. I didn't really feel like I wanted to give anything in meetings. I never really wanted to give my opinion because I remember feeling like it doesn't matter if I do it one way or the other.
Yes.
And the quote that I saw was, you have a problem in your company or in your business when your most passionate people become silent.
Ah, yes.
And I loved seeing that quote. I think it was on LinkedIn, of course, of all places. But I remember seeing that and I'm like, that's what I feel. That is what I'm feeling, is that it doesn't matter what I say, because whatever this dynamic and this weird that's going on, I feel like I shouldn't have a voice and I don't need to have one anymore.
Yes. And that's a danger sign. You're exactly right. That's a danger sign because, people have to interact. And, I always, I have my little phrases, right? They're really a little bit of tension, a little bit of conflict is good, right? You don't want a bunch of yes people, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone just agrees with everything. Well, how do you know that you're pushing the envelope, you're pushing these difficult things to make them better? You don't want a bunch of people that just agree with everything. You want to have some tension. You want to have a little bit of conflict. You want people to feel like it's perfectly fine that maybe they have a different opinion on how we may go about solving a particular thing. You'd like them opinion, but not in degrading somebody else, right? You'll find that as those things start to happen, you're going to find that's the sign of a very norming, performing type of group. Because you don't want, everyone is not everyone doesn't have the answer for everything. That's why we all have our individual skills and capability. You find that as you start to go down certain paths, you want people to sign, to bring up if they think we're going down the wrong path, right? So, this is it. You learn this by experience, I think, as well. You can't sit in a classroom and learn some of this stuff. You've got to learn it by doing it, by leading a group, by leading a team, by engaging in some of these things. And you learn this kind of stuff. And I just kind of say, it's interesting. It's helped me recognize this is going to happen, do those necessary things early, and you'll find you'll have much successful outcomes in a shorter time period, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. So I think we went through all of the steps into performing. Do you have extra things that you want to talk about performing? Do you feel like we touched on it enough?
I think we've hit it at the high level. I mean, okay. There's whole classes, there's whole things going on about team building, right? Different ways of dealing with team building and different things you can do. But I think at this stage, again, I just wanted to touch on sort of a couple of these areas. I think at this stage, I think people probably have a general sense here. If we want to get into more details about some of the specific areas, obviously we can jump into another podcast or whatever, but
yeah, we could do a part 2.
hit it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a question though. Say that people, if any of the things that you are saying to them resonates with them and they want to maybe get more training in this, or is there anything that you recommend, whether it's books or, and I don't mean to catch you off guard if this is a question you weren't expecting, but a book or a class or a type of program, anything like that they could train themselves if they find themselves in this situation on how to get through storms?
Yes, there are, I guess I would just say, one of the companies that I worked for, all of them have been fantastic, but I'll tell you, one of the companies is really viewed worldwide as really just a phenomenal company. Okay. And some of the training things that they had available, team building and team training is a common area across many companies. And so you can go out, whether it's on the internet or through some of the training, companies and things, there's all kinds of team building training.
Okay.
Whole concept here of boiling it down into these 4 steps, I think is while they may not say it specifically, this is really what it's about when we talk about team building and successful teams. Okay. I kind of boil it down. I remember one of the training courses back in one of my first company that this is the way they described it, was forming, storming, norming, and it sticks with you. It's kind of catchy, right? It's not just team building, right? So anyway, plenty of things you can find related to this topic.
Perfect. Yep. Yeah, no, I think that was great. I think a lot of people will take, even just in our own specific scenarios. I think I'll say this last thing and then we can kind of move to our next topic. I think even dealing with what we dealt with in the past year or so, going from being in an office space around each other all the time, you have a certain operating rhythm. You have a certain, as you're saying, you're norming. That is your norming. You go to work, you sit at your desk, you see Sue and Bob and Dave and whatever, and then you sit down, you work on your computer, and you got your phone, go. This past year, a lot of people dealt with, okay, everybody's going home, and now you need to figure out how to work from home, even though you don't have a home office. You don't necessarily know what to do with your kids. You don't, and the list goes on and on of all these different things. That was storming.
Oh, baby, you bet.
Like that was storming like no other. And then now it's like, those are the days that we look back on like, oh, remember when everybody was on mute, when we first started using Zoom. But it's good to find that at least for myself, and I think other companies, I can speak for them as well, that we've definitely gotten to that norming phase. And I think we're definitely back into the performing as well.
Yeah, that is a perfect example because, think about it. This working from home for the majority of people came up pretty rapidly. Now think about it. If there isn't any discussion, say you're the supervisor, your employees all of a sudden are now all working from home, 3 days, 4 days a week, right? If you don't have a discussion, think of it as in the forming, storming aspect. If you don't have a discussion with your employees about, well, how are we going to do this? Mm-hmm. And expectations, and what does success look like when we're working from home? And having some of those conversations about that, I can guarantee as time goes by without doing it, you're going to have different people have different expectations. And all of a sudden you're going to start questioning, well, why are they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? Well, how come you haven't done this? And you're going to get into a bit of the storming aspect because you really didn't talk about how are we going to operate as a high performing team while all of a sudden half of us or 3/4 of us are sitting in our home offices in front of, computer screens.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen already. How do you handle people? How do you, old school? Well, unless you have a person sitting next to you in the office, you're all in the same location. How do you know they're working? Mm-hmm. Well, there's still people that think that way.
Yeah.
Well, how do I know they're working if they're sitting in their home office, right? How do I know they're working hard?
Yeah.
People that think that way still.
Yeah.
So all I would suggest is you come back to the same model. And as long as you have those discussions up front, you can get through any potential storming quickly, right?
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. I
Yeah.
love that topic. Next topic I know we wanted to touch on, which is very much so related to the first, is tools
Yes.
for success. Oh, excuse me. Tools for successful problem solving. So it sounds like you have a couple steps and tools for people to add to their tool belt to help them out in these maybe more difficult scenarios.
Yeah. So, I was thinking about for this podcast, trying to keep it to maybe two simple areas. And, these are things that I guess have stuck with me for many, many, many years. This second one, I have to give credit to an individual that was my supervisor many, many years ago. His name's Doug Eccleston. Okay.
Thanks, Doug.
Wonderful supervisor, wonderful manager. And I'll tell you what, this thing, when we talked about this, it's stuck with me ever since. And what I found is, again, as a supervisor, as a manager, how do we develop highly successful employees? And it's another simple little skill, little tool. I call it, people will laugh, if people watch this and they hear me talking about it, they're going to laugh because they know exactly what I'm talking about all the time. I call it the 3 simple step process, right? Simple steps. Number 1, what are the facts? Number 2, what do they mean? Or the implications of it? And 3, what do we do about it?
All right, say them again a little bit slower so people can write them down.
Number 1, what are the facts? Number 2, what do they mean? What are the implications related to those facts? And 3, what do we do about it? Okay, now what does this mean, right? What are we talking about? Let's just say I'm a supervisor, okay? And I've got 5 people working for me, whatever, okay? If all that these people do is on any given day, they're trying to work on something, they have some objective they're trying to achieve or whatever it is, and all that they do is come to me as their supervisor and say, I got this problem. Here's this issue, or this came up today, or this happened, or we weren't able to manufacture this part today, or this person didn't show up, or whatever it is, whatever the problem is. This applies, I'll just say personal level, it applies related to work. This works. In my view, it works. You can apply this to anything, okay? So you also hear, ready, aim, shoot, right? This logic of, people shoot before they ready and aim, right? Mm-hmm. Okay? It's sort of the same logic here is, what do we do about it? Some problem comes up. You talk to people and they all have answers on how to solve that problem.
Oh, that drives me nuts.
They all have answers.
I have sat in conference rooms that I'm like, okay, let's stop just discussing the problem and how bad the problem is. Let's start talking about solutions.
Everybody has their belief, their opinions, their whatever on how to address whatever it is we're talking about. And how many times is whatever they're suggesting, does it even work, right? And I always just sort of step back and say, okay, wait a minute. It's sort of like if I'm hiring salaried people, right? I'm expecting high performing people. I'm expecting people have a brain, right? They know what they know in their particular area, right? I expect them to solve problems, not bring me problems. Okay, so here's how this model works. I look at it and say, I could hire a teenager. I could hire a kid to go out and find the facts. Mm-hmm. What's going on? Go out and gather some data. Go do this, go do that. I can find, like I said, I can hire a teenager mm-hmm. and gather facts. The successful people will be the ones that can take that data, massage what it means, what the implications of that are, what does it mean? And then take it even one step further. What do I think we ought to do about it? there may be a couple different options. I could do this, option A. I could do this, option B. I could do this, option C, right? There may be pluses or minuses associated to those options. But when I think about what the facts are, what the implications are in some of these different options, I'm thinking that maybe we ought to do option B. Now, think of this as you're the supervisor of that individual. Do you want that individual coming to you saying, here's the data, here's the problem I have. Here you go, supervisor, and I'm dropping it in your lap. You're going to look at this and say, wait a minute. Okay, you've got this problem. I've got 50 problems I'm trying to solve, and you're bringing another one. Okay? You're bringing me another one. I'll tell you one thing. Have your employees work with them, develop them to not only bring you that problem, but bring you what are the implications of that problem and what do they suggest we do about it? What are the options and which ones do you suggest we implement, we do to address that problem? And then as supervisor employee, we'll bounce that around, maybe as a coach, as a mentor, as a sounding board. We'll talk about that particular, hey, did you think about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Oh yeah, I didn't think about that item. Okay, let me check into that. But yeah, generally that makes the most sense from my view in talking through this. It makes sense to me that that option is something we ought to pursue.
Yeah.
Go for it, employee. So what just happened in this model, right? Instead of an employee walking into your office and saying, hey, I got this problem. I just heard about this. We're not making this product. I got a supplier that's not delivering me materials. Here you go, boss. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do with this, right? You want me to solve your problem for you? Well, I would suggest if you can develop your people and get them in the mode and the mindset of not only bringing you a problem, but bringing you the implications of that issue, as well as some potential options or what they recommend you do to solve that problem, and then have the discussion with your, between the supervisor and employee, you'll be much more successful.
I like
highly effective employees that solve problems, not simply bring you problems.
Yes, I like that a lot. And I think even to tag on to that, it's almost when people just constantly bring you problems every day. This was other management training I went through, and they said, I remember they just asked the room and they said, write down how many times your employees call you in a day. Write down how many times they call you, they email you, they text you, write down how many times. They didn't tell you why they were asking, but they said, write it down. And some people were like, 20, 50, and then there were some that were like 3. I guess I failed and they're like, no, the more your employees call you in a day is the more dependent they are on you to answer and deliver them from their issues and help fix their problems from them.
Yes.
So you want your employees to not have to call you that much. You don't want them to call you with every issue that anybody can do. Anybody can call you with a problem. That's why you were saying, teenager or child or anybody of any experience level can call you and say, I have this problem. But that takes a next level person to go, hey boss, hey Steve, I have this problem, but I then took it a step further. And here's 3 solutions I thought about. I think the second one might be the best, but I need to bounce it off of you.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Because, it's, when you get into some of these, any position, right? Your time is challenged. There are so many things that need to be done, particularly in manufacturing. There are issues that come up every single day. And there's no way you're going to get to everything. Yeah. And developing highly effective employees to think this way, I would just say as the individual, you follow this approach in your thinking. So if I'm working on something, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not only going to define what the facts are, instead of just shooting at the hip on what I think the solution to this problem is. Mm-hmm. Facts. What does it all mean? Here's what I think we ought to do about it. And you do that with management executives, I guarantee you will be successful in your career more than 80% of the people. Mm-hmm. Because that's what executives, managers, that's what people need. That's what they want is high performing individuals, right?
Yeah.
give you an example in supply chain of what this looks like.
Okay.
I'll give you a real example. This comes up almost every week, okay? Almost every week. So in the supply chain, we have buyers, okay, right? Purchasing people, buyers. Picture this. You are the supervisor of that department. Of course, I want people to tell me if there's a problem going on. Of course, right? We need to know if there's problems going on. But take this example. You have a buyer. The buyer walks into your office and says, hey, I just got a note from this supplier that sent me an email that said they're raising the price of the things we buy from them by 25% starting Monday.
Oh my goodness.
They come into my office, they tell me that piece of information. And I say, okay. And I wait. I'm now listening, right? Listening skills. I'm now silent. I want to see what comes next. Okay. Now, the difference between an average employee and a high-performing individual. What happens next is the key. So the buyer just told me they got an email from a supplier that they said they're raising the price 25% starting Monday. Okay. What am I waiting for? What I'm waiting for is that buyer to then say, okay, and here's what that means. If they raise the price by 25%, here's the impact to us as a company. Here's how much we buy from that supplier. You know, are they a primary source or not? Here's what the impact of that is. Is it going to cost us 10 grand? Is it going to cost us $1 million? Okay. And if this happens, this is what's going to be the impact. This is the implications to us. Now, as I think about this, I'm the buyer. As I think about this, here's what I've already done. And here's what I'd like to do longer term. I've already contacted the supplier and said, sorry, you can't raise my price starting Monday. You have to give me 90 days notice. Sorry, that's not going to work. And you're going to get into that discussion.
Yeah.
Why are you raising this price? You're gathering data. Can we hold off a bit until I gather a little bit more information? Again, you want to get some time, right? They're telling me they're going to raise the price on Monday. No, right? But the buyer is looking at the implications and they're looking at how do I go about addressing this so that it does not have a negative impact on our company. What I want the buyer to do, right? That's an effective buyer, okay? Now, the buyer that simply walks into the office and says, hey, the supplier told me they're raising this price by 25% starting Monday. Hey, boss, what do I do? They've just given me another problem of the 50 that I already have that I'm trying to deal with. And now I've got another problem that I have to deal with.
Yeah.
It's an emergency. I now have to react, right? Because if that's a $10 million hit to our EBITDA, to our P&L, we've got a major problem, right? And I've got to address it right now. So you can see this as an example of how do you train individuals in going through a method like this to really recognize that problems are going to come up every single day. How do you go about addressing them?
I have a question for you as
Yes.
you're talking about this. I'm sure throughout this training, it's kind of a two-part question. Training tips for people that are listening, but also say you're currently average employee that you're trying to turn into a highly successful employee doesn't make the cut.
Right.
Like how long do you give them to figure out, like, because not everybody's going to pass that test. I think there are just naturally average people and, especially average workers, no matter how much you train them, part of that's pride and, wanting to be successful and motivation levels. Like everybody has different levels of those things. So there are going to be people that do not pass that test. Right. Of being able to bring you a problem and then go, well, how am I going to solve the problem? There's people that don't want to solve problems. They just want to complain about problems. So how do you then, how do you weed those people out then, I guess, as quickly as possible to be like, no, they might be the problem of the problem?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I understand. So, I guess, again, as time goes by, you learn some of these kinds of things that, every individual has certain skills and capabilities. One of the keys is finding out what those are. What do they enjoy? What are they motivated, enthusiastic about? What are they good at? Where are they an A player? In what aspect? And not everybody is a good buyer, right? I don't care if they've been buying for the last 10 years, they still may not be a good buyer, right? You don't know what the history was. So I think part of this is like anyone, we try to develop people, we try to train them, but some people just simply aren't going to get it. And so the key then becomes, what are the things that they are good at? What are they motivated at? And maybe we have to move them into a different position. But, long term, I don't want to keep a person that's just, call it a C player, right? I want high performing A players. I want people to do things better than I do. Mm-hmm. So, it's a tough thing here to just simply say, I'm going to cut somebody loose. Well, not really. Because again, if you look at it from the standpoint of every individual has certain skills and things that they're good at. And if those types of skills are needed at our company, maybe I need to move them into a different position.
Okay.
It's going to be a win-win. It's going to be good for them. It's going to be good for me long-term, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to find somebody that is better at doing the necessary things that we need and call it a supply chain function, right? So yeah, the fact of the matter is you may end up, 3 strikes you're out. Mm-hmm. Once we've talked about it. I've tried a second time, third time, sorry, I can't, you can't continue to make these types of errors, right? But I mean, that's a little bit dramatic. I think it really comes back to, again, remember the beginning of this conversation. It's all about people and how well people do things, what capabilities they have, skills. And the better you can match what people are motivated on, what they enjoy, what they're good at, and match them to those types of positions and things that we need, now you've got a high performing company and you will be tremendously better as a manager, right? Mm-hmm. Wow. So it's kind of interesting, the 3 steps. I just say, it's something that's just stuck with me. And it really applies even to a parent when you're talking with your kids. Think about this. Mm-hmm. Right? The kid has a problem. Okay. And they come to mom or dad, hey, I got this problem. Wouldn't it be interesting to, okay, you have this problem. Well, what does it mean? What are the how does that make you feel? What are the issues around it? What do you think you ought to do about this? If you get your kids thinking about not only the problem, but well, how do we go about dealing with it? Which I know it's difficult with kids, but again, as a parent, I mean, this is what we have to teach our kids, right? And they become much better parents as well in the future, right? Because they think more about how do we make this successful, right? How does this work? But anyway, I just kind of find this process, this tool, this way of looking at these things, it's been very successful. It's been very helpful in all people that I know that we've worked and used this type of thing. It works. It works.
No, it does. It definitely sounds like it works. And I think even putting that and combining it with what your first topic was that we were talking about today, I think they definitely go hand in hand. I see why you wanted to add them together. Yep. But is there any other topics or any other things on another one of those that you want to say something else about?
How are we doing on time? I think we're getting close to the end of our
yeah, we are. I always like to throw that in on the end, though. If there's anything, any stories, anything that people like to add in at the end that I don't ask about.
Sure. We could spend time talking about these in depth. I mean, there's obviously other areas that we could get into as well. Sure. I think it's just a matter of if people have questions or want to get into more of this, I mean, feel free, whether they contact me, obviously they're, through the podcast, they can contact Cray, they can contact you, and obviously we can get engaged and talk about more things.
Okay.
Hopefully this is kind of given your people that watch this, folks that kind of watch this, a couple interesting areas to think about as they try to supervise people or develop people or create high performing teams. Just a couple things that have worked over the years, right? Mm-hmm. So no, hopefully people will find it helpful. It's been
yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I have the saying, and I said it in a podcast I did earlier, is if one person takes one thing, out of the podcast, then they become a better manager, a better person, a better leader, a better, better follower. I mean, leaders and followers are both important, and they can take one thing out of it. That's the whole point of what we're doing. So
that's great. I'm glad you're doing this. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your time today. And yeah, if anybody wants to get a hold of Steve, feel free to contact myself. And I'll be able to get you in touch with him. Again, he is a complete supply chain wizard. And hopefully we'll probably be doing a part 2, part 3, and a couple other topics as well.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, Steve. All right.
All right.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Want to follow along? Be sure to subscribe to listen to our latest episodes.